Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Tuesday at 11:19. A super hot day today. We had some really hot temperatures yesterday. I'm not sure how hot it actually got. Probably 70s, maybe 80s, but I think today it might be even hotter. It's already fairly early in the day, and it's a squatcha. So I love it. I love this. I love this weather. So, and we're, I guess full full first week into the actual summer season. So, thinking about, typically summertime is movie time. That's, even since I was a kid, I've always, excited about going to the movies during the summer and seeing all the big blockbusters that come out. The only movie I'm kind of excited about seeing is Superman. That's coming out in a couple weeks. The new James Gunn movie, but I'm on the fence about it. Honestly, I kind of am a little bit worried. I've seen some of the trailers for it. I liked two. I saw two of the trailers, and I was really loving it when I first saw the first trailer. But then, and I definitely have, like I've talked a lot about this kind of thing on this channel. I definitely have hardcore fatigue when it comes to superhero movies. Still love them in my heart of hearts. I'm still a comic book nerd. There's 1,000 movies in the MCU that I just love, and but they've really. I just feel like the last 2 years has just been misfire after misfire. Even Thunderbolts was good in some ways and better than pretty much every Marvel movie that's come out in a while. But even that was like okay. It was good. It was pretty decent, but it could have been a lot better. And I was ultimately kind of let down by that movie. So when I saw the second trailer for the new Superman movie, I was worried because I felt like, holy shit, there's so much going on in this movie. There's so many characters. I don't know what's going on. And I watched the trailer like kind of excited, but ultimately I was just really confused. So I don't know. I don't know. I do want to see it. I probably will. I will definitely see it probably in the theater. But I don't know. I'm on the fence. That's actually the only movie that I know of that I can think of off the top of my head, and the only movie that I'm kind of excited about seeing in the theater. Kind of crazy. But anyway, so today's going to be a music show. I've been mixing it up. I've been doing music shows. Doing music shows for this channel for Film Fanatic is not anything new. I've always been doing music shows because I've always said it's all part. It's all part of the same tree. It's all part of the same thing for me. When it comes to just enjoyment and music, film, and art, and especially when it pertains to my band Quantum. So anyway, today's show is going to be on one of my all-time favorite bands, and that is a German band called Can. They're kind of known as a krautrock band or experimental jam band, if you will. And I discovered Can quite a few years ago. I haven't actually listened to them in a while, but I need to start listening to them again. But I went through a huge period where I listened to so much of their music. I have most of their albums, and just an incredible band. Full on experimentation. The first album I ever got of theirs was Tago Mango, which is probably their best album. But I have most of their albums, and they're all just incredible. Future Days, Soon Over Babaluma, Saw the Light, Monster Movie, which was, I believe, their debut album. And again, They came out in the very very late '60s from Germany, and they had a real interesting period. They were kind of I kind of feel like, well, they kind of essentially started the same time that Pink Floyd started, and Pink Floyd obviously from England got massively huge, and in the early phases of Floyd, especially when they were trying to more or less find a sound, or they were really all about all out experimentation, especially when Sid Barrett left the band. That's my favorite period. Uma Guma, Live at Pompeii is my favorite of theirs. But shortly after that period, or really as that period was happening, Pink Floyd, Pink Floyd's career exploded. David Gilmour first joined the band after Sid Barrett left the band, was kind of kicked out of the band, and at that time they were a full on kind of experimental space rock band, and more or less Can started the same exact time, but commercially Pink Floyd became a household name. I mean, they're one of the biggest, most well known rock bands on the face of the planet. But as far as notoriety and just people knowing their name, a band like Can, not so much. And they were kind of both bands kind of came out at the same time, late '60s, and Pink Floyd's career just exploded. And they Can never had that, obviously never had that success. But for me, they're one when it comes to psychedelic music, experimental music. They are, they're gods. I think they're one of the greatest bands ever. I remember many, many, many years ago, probably 15 or 20 years ago, I used to work at a restaurant. And one of the guys that I worked with, who was the chef, he was really into music. And one of the bands he turned me on to was Can. And he had a bunch of their albums, and we would listen to it at work. And I was just like, wow, like this, I was just blown away. And shortly after that, I ended up buying and tracking down all of their albums. And that first album that I remember being exposed to was Tango Mango, and that still to this day I own most of the Can records, but that album is still probably my favorite. They were such an interesting band because they were so funky, like generally funky for a bunch of white guys from Germany. Like their music was really funky, and they definitely had this really wild, kind of experimentation going on in their music. And they had such a unique style, and obviously the psychedelic element. I like to think when it comes to influences, bands that are tremendously influential on the weird music that I do with Quantum, I look at Can as being one of the biggest influences. And they were a band that just kind of did away with convention almost in every way. Where you typical rock bands or typical rock songs, you have your verse, chorus sections, and then you have your solos and your intros or your outros. What they did was they just kind of took all of those kind of known conventions of how you write a rock song and just kind of threw it out the window. They also incorporated electronics. They definitely had a very electronica sound in their music with keyboards and the whole psychedelic element. Again, massive influence for me, especially with Quantum. And then also jazz and also jazz fusion, and with rock, and I think a lot of funk and soul music because again, like I said, they're some of their grooves and their tunes were just like so incredibly funky, and kind of untouchable. And today they still remain, one of my favorite all time rock bands, uh, easily. What an incredible lineup too. Dano Suzuki, uh, Emin Schmidt, who was the keyboard player, Jackie Liebezet, Holger Kusky, Michael Corrali, Malcolm Moni, Roscoe G, Rebop Kuwakaba, and David C. Johnson. They had a few different lineup changes over the years, but just they really. I think they. Again, I own most of their records, and I have to say that they were
Powering off.
always experimenting. Every record that they put out was always radically different, but yet Can had a very distinct style. And through the decades, they recently, I mean, it's probably 10 years ago or so. They were still somewhat active, and when you think that they started in the '60s, it's kind of unbelievable. But they were a band that were really all about kind of reinventing themselves all the time, really taking creative risks, really taking really, you know, proactively kind of changing their sound. And I have to say, being a drummer, my one of my favorite drummers is Jackie Leesbeth from Can. I mean, again, so innovative. I remember a long time ago when I got into them, Tango Mango, and I started buying most of their albums. There was a few times where I tried learning some of the grooves that Jackie Leesbeth was coming that was he was playing on some of these records and some of these songs, and it was so hard, like so unconventional, so outside of the box, like, and the way they approached everything, whether the method of how they would play guitar, the way the vocals would sit in the music, especially the rhythm, so unconventional and so unique. And it's funny because we live, I live in Maine. I've lived in Maine for a really long time, and you know, ever since Fish, I mean, Fish is a massively popular band in Maine and, well, across the world. And they kind of continued what the Grateful Dead started in the late in the '60s. And you always hear the term jam band, and you have the jam band scene is massive, and basically you have bands like String Cheese Incident, Fish, and um, there's a lot of local bands, Hambone, uh, but the jam band scene is like massive. I mean, if you want to be kind of a successful musician in mid coast Maine, you can put together a jam band, like essentially like do a bunch of Grateful Dead covers or some Fish covers, and get a pretty tight set together, and you'll probably do pretty good. Like, you'll probably make some money. You'll probably you'll get a pretty good following, what have you. And but to me, it's like when I listen to Can, and then also early Floyd. To me, that's real jam band music. Like, I have total respect for the Grateful Dead and Fish, and I have given that music a chance numerous times. But after many tries, I realize it's just not my jam. I'm just not. It's just not my thing. And the thing that I love about Can so much is there is structure in the music. There's a lot of jazz influence. There's a lot of jazz fusion influence, psychedelia, electronica, rock, avant-garde music. But the thing with them, and they do a lot of, they would, when they would perform concerts and even on their records, they would have these extended, jams, if you want to call it jams. But to me, like, Can has like a real kind of, you know, dangerous edge to their music. Their music has an edge. It's really raw. It's not perfect. It's not clean, but it's raw, and that's the thing that I love about music. I mean, I love on one side, I love pop music too. I love music when it's polished and clean and tight, and then even films for that matter that are really polished and clean and tight. But generally, I like things when you know, when they have this riskier edge. They're a little bit dirtier. They're just more. It's more raw. And Can was all about that, and they just had this rawness to their music and this kind of gritty edge. And when I listen to, the Grateful Dead or any of these other jam bands, Fish and String Cheese Incident, who just played in Portland recently, to me it's like, and I'm not knocking the bands, I'm not knocking the fans, but I totally respect them. I think all of those guys are very, very, very good musicians. But to me, it just never has that edge to it. It doesn't have that grit to it. It's not. When I listen to Fish, and I've heard them a bazillion times, or when I even listen to live Grateful Dead or any of these other jam bands, I never hear like this like risky edge to their music. I never hear like this dirty grittiness to their music. But with Can, I hear that, and there's like always this sense of you're not sure where it's gonna go, and it has this edge to it, and there's an element of danger to it, and it's really raw, and you know over the years I've just concluded that's why that stuff is not really for me, and even when it comes to movies, the same thing. Like I gravitate towards. That's why I love the world of exploitation so much because it's just kind of raw and nasty, and it's just there. It's just coming at you. Even though I love and admire and respect things that are very, I guess, curated or clean or tight, you know, really put together, I just naturally gravitate towards stuff that's just raw and kind of nasty. And to me, Can was the epitome of that musically. So incredible. And I also gravitate towards bands and artists that, when it's it's well, in my experience, like playing in bands, it's very, very hard and very tricky for a band to develop their own sound or style. That takes a long time, and you can't really make it happen. You can't force it. It's gonna come with experience. And I've been in bands over the years where one band in particular that I was in, we were doing lots of covers, and then the band eventually like slowly moved into doing original songs, and did that for a while, and it was fairly successful. But we ran into this total like crossroads or roadblock because everything was so derivative of other bands. Like we never found our own voice as a band, and that was this big struggle that band had. And it's tricky, but and I have been fortunate to be in situations where a band has its own, does develop its own sound, and but I really gravitate towards artists that are not afraid to more or less reinvent themselves. David Bowie, for instance, pretty much my favorite musician of all time, the most inspirational. He took creative risks every project he did. Every record was different. Other groups that I really love that I feel do that and did that is a band called The Liars, one of my favorite rock bands. Certain artists like that where it's like they're gonna push the envelope. You're gonna Deaf Heaven's another band I think that does that, pushes the envelope, And all of those bands and groups I'm talking about right now all have a very distinct sound and style. But yet and I feel like that's exactly one of the aspects of Can. That's one of the reasons I love them, because I consider them to be a band and an art, and a group of artists that are not afraid to um, take chances and risks, in the studio and then outside of the studio. Highly creative, highly innovative, and they're kind of chameleons. Like, each record sounds completely different. I've had that experience a lot with Can and those other artists that I've talked about, where they might have put out a one particular album and I'm like listening to it a lot, and I fall in love with it. And then, say, a couple of years later they put out another record, and at first I have to kind of get used to it. I like it, but I'm not sure. Like, I might even be a little bit on the fence about it. But it takes a while to kind of get used to, and then most of the time I'll come around to it and I fall in love with that album. And I think part of the reason that process ends up happening a lot of the times, especially with these artists that take creative risks with each record and performance for that matter, is because they really don't stick to this certain kind of mold. They will reinvent themselves. They will do something creatively very different, and yet they still, you can kind of always tell whenever you hear a song written by Can or performed by Can, you can kind of tell it's them. Same thing with Def Heaven, and same thing with David Bowie or the Liars. Like, even though their records are so different from each other, they have a certain style, and to me that's a real interesting balance to strike as an artist. And again, getting back to Can, they were the epitome of that in every way. So yeah, amazing. And their records, I always love the way their records sound to their studio albums, because it was very close to almost hearing a live record, because everything was kind of raw and just very loose. So yeah, I realized this morning, like, oh wow, okay, I want to do another music show, and this is a band that I really really need to talk about, because one of the most important bands of all time, one of my favorite rock bands of all time. And getting back to the jam band scene, to me, that's Can is an example of real jam band music. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.